Welcome to the Loot Box Report. I'm Ashley.
I'm Mica.
When you think of censorship, it's a pretty strong word. What comes to mind? Government banning books, maybe? Government officials deciding what music you can and can't listen to? I don't know, cracking down on political speech, that kind of thing, right?
You know, like black bars over nipples.
The worst kind of censorship.
Exactly. But now censorship could also include loot boxes.
No, first they came from my loot boxes. But that's actually what a group of game developers are claiming, and they're planning a roundtable discussion at the upcoming Game Developers Conference to talk about preserving what they call developers' rights and how to fight against this potential censorship.
Okay, well, they're basically claiming that clueless politicians are again trying to stick their nose into an area that they might not know anything about, and it's up to devs to learn how to defend their rights.
I mean, they're not wrong about a lot of politicians potentially getting in over their heads, though.
Right.
But it's no secret that loot boxes have come under a lot of fire from consumers in the past several months, sparked most recently, most bigliously, by Star Wars Battlefront 2, whose loot boxes were so controversial that EA temporarily removed them from the game.
Lots of gamers feel like some loot boxes in full-price games were like Battlefront 2 were introducing so-called pay-to-win features, where you could just buy a better weapon or a piece of gear, as opposed to something fully cosmetic, like in Overwatch.
Yeah, basically anything that could upset the balance of the game. Cosmetics, typically, people go, yeah, okay, fine. But if you can get better weapons or better perks, somehow, by paying into the system, that's considered no-go territory. It's also gotten the attention of governments around the world. From the US to European countries like Belgium and Sweden, governments are taking a look at loot boxes, cosmetic and pay-to-win, and deciding whether they should be regulated like gambling.
The game industry has pushed back hard against that classification, with the Entertainment Software Association saying that loot boxes aren't gambling, but a voluntary feature in certain video games that provide players with another way to obtain virtual items that can either be used to enhance their game experience.
Well, looks like the International Game Developers Association, which is another developer interest group, agrees and worries that any attempts at regulation would result in censorship.
They're planning to talk about it at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco that starts March 19th.
That's coming up.
Yeah. At the conference is a scheduled roundtable called Censorship Strikes Back, and it's like Star Wars. And it's headed up by Daniel Greenberg, who serves on an IGDA committee for anti-censorship and social issues.
The summary of the panel makes it pretty clear how the group feels about governments possibly cracking down on loot boxes, in case the name of the panel alone didn't do it for you.
It reads, global gains against game censorship are suddenly at risk from a combination of actions against our industry. With burgeoning legislation around the world against loot boxes, a handful of government officials again wield outsized power over our creative and business decisions.
It adds that game developers and allies will get updates on the latest assaults on their self-expression and business rights, learn about potential implications of recent government changes, find out what has worked in the past, and learn how to protect themselves and support their peers.
Other topics that will be discussed include some countries banning augmented reality games in specific places, and the World Health Organization's recent classification of gaming disorder as a mental health condition. I'm guessing they're talking about Pokemon Go for those banned AR games.
Well, yeah, potentially. And while I'd definitely expected it to be against the other two, the classifying of loot box regulation as censorship is kind of an interesting one.
Okay, so let's try to dig into what they're saying here. Basically, it looks like they're making the argument that government officials, who might not understand the video game industry at all,
who probably don't understand the video game industry at all.
Exactly, are on the verge of making laws that greatly impact the industry they know nothing about.
Right, to unpack the issue, we actually contacted IGDA and talked to Executive Director Jen McLean. Here's what she said regarding the whole gambling and censorship issue.
She told us the IGDA is concerned about the potential unintended consequences of regulations made by people who don't understand game development or game design, and done in hundreds of different political systems around the world. Poorly written regulations or laws that are inconsistent do pose a risk of restricting content in games. For example, if a law banned all random in-game prizes, the restriction could apply to a large number of RPGs that have random loot drops but do not use loot boxes.
She added, we believe that it's important to discuss the issue openly, including the steps game developers and game players can and should take to make sure game content isn't inappropriately restricted or limited.
McLean did acknowledge that loot boxes can be predatory in some cases and relatively innocuous in others, but she felt like it should be up to developers to police how intrusive they are.
She said, we think the best approach to loot boxes involves reasonable, responsible implementations by game developers, including agreeing not to target children with loot boxes, clearly disclosing drop rates, and making it easy for players to track how much money they spent on loot boxes.
Ooh, I'd like that one. That would be nice.
There's a lot of people who I think don't want to know, and if you don't want to know, you should probably know.
That's me. What's interesting there is that seems like it's a bit at odds with the ESA's approach, which we covered yesterday. It boils down to they're going to label all games with loot boxes and microtransactions, but they'll also label any games with DLC as well, which means pretty much every game with no distinction between them.
Pretty much every game.
Yeah, and that's not anywhere near the level of disclosure IGDA is suggesting here.
And while it is true, a lot of politicians have probably never played a game at all and have no idea what they're talking about, and that is absolutely a risk, which is why there's been a call to the industry to regulate itself before the government gets involved, which, based on the ESA's current stance, they're not exactly doing. IGDA's concerns about a catch-all that goes overboard, not unfounded. However, a state representative in Hawaii who's introducing some anti-loot box legislation does seem to get gaming better than most.
State Rep Chris Lee told Kotaku last year that it all sprang from his experiences playing the mobile game Clash of Clans. He said he ended up spending a few $100s in in-game crystals over a few months. Then he heard from local teachers who were seeing the same behavior in their students.
Lee's bill would do a couple of things. Ban the sale of games containing loot boxes to people who are under 21 in Hawaii. He also wants devs to disclose whether their games have gambling-based mechanics, so a little bit more, I guess, precise than what the ESA is doing, and to publicize the odds of drops in loot boxes.
And frankly, that does make some sense if you consider loot boxes to be gambling, and aside from the age restriction, it's not far off the levels of disclosure IGDA seems to be on board with.
Yeah, which is largely say what you're doing, don't target the kids, and so on. A number of governments around the world are also starting to look into the practice, and if they start regulating loot boxes like gambling devices, that would probably mean similar kinds of age restrictions for consumers. And man, that would really change the whole model of how video game development's funded.
Yeah, because while lots of gamers don't like loot boxes, they make a shit ton of money, and the big devs make billions with a B, not an M, off loot boxes every year. Activision Blizzard alone made $4 billion with a B, remember that, on microtransactions just last year.
And so it makes sense that the publishers kind of want to keep them because those Bs are good for business.
That's what business is. B. B stands for business.
B for business.
McLean said that the best approach, in her opinion, is dialogue, not regulation. She told us we strongly favor an open, constructive dialogue between game players and game developers about loot boxes, especially as an alternative to regulation. By choosing not to purchase loot boxes or not to play games that use loot boxes in a way players feel are unethical, gamers wield tremendous influence and can push change in the interactive entertainment industry far more effectively and more quickly than regulation possibly could.
Which is true, because the outcry from gamers did get Battlefront 2 to remove its microtransactions when the game launched. That was a pretty big deal. But again, it was temporary. As far as the developers themselves go, well, their opinions really vary quite a bit. It is important to note that IGDA doesn't speak for all developers. It's not a mouthpiece for the entire industry. It's an industry body, but you get a lot of outliers.
Yeah, a lot of developers weighed in on the topic after the whole Battlefront 2 fiasco last year, and their opinions on loot boxes really ran the gamut here. Some hate them, others felt like if you don't like them, don't buy games that have them.
Yeah, Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford has said he's against what he called predatory monetization schemes in free-to-play games for consumable goods, and even more so against them in premium games. He added, "I tend to oppose such techniques both as an artist and creator, and also as a customer and a gamer."
Pitchford said that's why Borderlands never sold golden keys that unlocked some of the best loot, despite there being demand for some gamers.
On the other hand, Pitchford did say he was supportive of monetization in the form of things like post-launch DLC, which has become an industry standard for years now. He wrote, "As a customer and as a creator, I think that new, discrete content that took energy to create deserves to have the effort compensated."
Others sympathized with the fellow developers and pointed to the fact that the price of games hasn't really kept up with inflation. Braid creator Jonathan Blow pointed out that some Super Nintendo games were selling for $50 back in 1991, which he said would be about $90 today. So yeah, try putting that sticker price on a game.
Or, I guess, visit another country.
Right.
That is the norm in some regions.
Fair. Meanwhile, indie dev Dan Marshall tweeted, "Reminder that if you really hate loot boxes / microtransactions, there are plenty of indie games that would genuinely appreciate your cash."
So yeah, safe to say, there are a variety of opinions on this issue, and developers, while they may not like loot boxes, generally seem to feel a tad more sympathy towards companies who are making AAA games in 2018 than a lot of consumers do about getting loot boxes lumped in with their game they already paid full price for.
Yeah. Obviously, this controversy isn't going away anytime soon, and it'll definitely be interesting to see what's said at the IGDA panel in just a few days.
Yeah, so what do you guys think of IGDA equating loot box regulation to censorship? Let us know in the comments.
And for all of your video game news, be sure to like this video, and if you're new around here, Subscribe to the know. Well, damn, those are some strong words, and
Yeah.
it lacked any Star Wars jokes. I'm very upset.
Right, you'd think they should throw a little bit in the description if they got them at the title.
Right. Other topics that will be discussed include some countries banning augmented reality games in specific places. State Rep Charles Lee told Kotaku last year.
Chris Lee.
Where did I get Charles?